for as long as I can remember. I don't know if I like it or if I'm just used to it. But I do know this. Being lonely does things to you. Feeling shit and bitter and angry all the time just eats away at you.
These are the very first words we hear our main character, Simon, say in this game. After hearing that lonesome monologue, we see scenes of a city at night. Maybe this is Stockholm. A car passes by and we follow a train on its tracks around the city. Inside this train, there is Simon, someone who has nobody else to comfort him, someone who knows only loneliness, sadness. This intro cutscene shows us the basics of what we should expect from this whole game. It is also a great introduction and I love it. It is such a memorable cutscene to open this game, and it couldn't have been done in any better way. Simon is a character that I, especially, can relate a lot to. His loneliness is something that I have already experienced a lot in my life, although in more recent times, things have changed. Regardless, the mark that the abyss of loneliness leaves on your spirit is a mark that will never fade away. You will always remember it, and for some people, this state of loneliness is all that they will experience in life. The intro cutscene ends with Simon walking down a street. He finds a strange man on the floor, and upon trying to help him, a car suddenly turns on and runs over Simon. From here, Simon falls unconscious, waking up sometime later in a place completely different. Some strange alley with only one way out. Looking up, we can see that it is nighttime. The sky is cloudy and there's a lot of wind up there. Leaves fall down from the trees, and that all combined together just creates such a great atmosphere. We, the player, then proceed to explore these strange alleys. We have no idea where we are, but the one thing we know is that we have to go home. Our mother sent us a message on the phone. She's worried about us and wants us to go home. So let's find our way there. First of all, we need a password for a padlock. So, what was that I just saw? I think I saw something when that lightning struck down. Maybe it's just my mind. To get the password to that padlock, we get a random user and a random password to this computer. And together with a few gaming shenanigans, there you go, there's the password. After unlocking the path ahead, you may have noticed that something is definitely off with the city. There was that figure that appeared when the lightning struck down, and now we saw a man at a window of the restaurant after we got the password. The city feels eerily empty, as if people suddenly went missing, or if some sort of pandemic happened. Maybe something even worse happened. We'll go down some more alleys until, out of a door, a creature attacks us. We use our pocket knife to defend ourselves, and we kill the attacker. He seems like a man, but sick and wounded. His eyes were red, and he was covered in blood. Maybe his own, maybe not. He was not the only creature though, for we find many more strange people like him that attack us. It is as if a zombie outbreak had occurred, and now we have to survive any way we can. The first place we find on our journey home are the apartments. Upon getting to the apartments, a mysterious number messages us. Somehow this person got our number and wants us to go to the 4th floor. So we make our way up there. While in the apartments, we are introduced to new enemies. This time, they are creepy twisted children. What seems to once have been boys run at us and attack us with 2 knives. While what seems to be a twisted doll caricature of a girl attacks us with metallic arms and legs. In the apartments, we discover that one of the citizens that lived there was a killer. We find his notes around the building and also a recording of him beheading a man. It seems he liked to stalk children, so maybe these monsters we see at the apartments are his victims, who came back from the grave to haunt the place. This plot, more specifically, about the apartment killer is one of the aspects I am the least interested when it comes to Cry of Fear. It just isn't that interesting when you compare to the other themes and things that happen in the game. And it also stands out as something that ultimately, in the greater scale of the game, has nothing to do with Simon. But going back to the apartments, we make our way to the mysterious numbers apartment. When we get there, it is far too late. We find a man who ended his own life inside his own bathtub. We see from the state of his corpse that he got this way quite some time ago. So apparently, either he wasn't the one sending us messages, or he was doing that from beyond the grave. Either case is equally scary. Now that our own single lead is gone, maybe it is time for us to leave this damned apartment. So we take the elevator down, with the goal to leave this place through the basements. But unexpectedly, we find ourselves once more at the apartments. This time, everything is completely off. This is just one of the many nightmare sequences that we get in the game. The apartment is all bloody and twisted. It is as if we had just entered Silent Hill. We go down a few stories until we cannot do that any longer. After following down a corridor and going through some random door, we find ourselves trapped inside a room with a monster far more dangerous than anything else we faced so far in this game, the Sower. Looking at this creature now, we can recall back to that thing that appeared when the lightning struck down. It was the Sower that we saw there. And now, we have no other option but to fight this creature and kill it. The abomination's weak spot is an eye on its back, and after dealing enough damage to it, the Sower ends up chopping its own head off. Simon is obviously consternated by everything that just happened, and because of that, he vomits onto the floor and passes out immediately after. All that we just went through is just introduction of the game Cry of Fear.
Was it you who made her do it? Why? You sick fuck!
Simon wakes up in a completely different place. The basement he intended on getting to in the first place. As if that crazy room with the Sower was nothing but a nightmare. The first thing he sees is a mysterious doctor, one who's wearing a gas mask. What if the thing that created all of these monsters is some sort of airborne virus? In that case, it is very probable that Simon has already been infected by it. The doctor goes away without explaining us anything. This is just the first time of the many we see the doctor throughout this game. We escaped the apartment building, now we're into the city. It is raining outside and I just think this ambience is incredible. I love rain and I love the sound of rain, so this is great. But continuing, we had killed the Sower just a few moments ago, but upon leaving the apartment's basement and getting inside another strange abandoned basement, it doesn't take long until we hear awful loud noises from another chainsaw. Truth is, as we will see later in the game, the Sower wasn't the only monster that uses a chainsaw in this game. Simon makes his way through some sewers, some construction areas, and some tunnels before finding a shotgun on a dead man's body. It so would seem that this guy decided to end his life with a shotgun. Maybe it was a better choice to abandon this world that way rather than to be killed by one of those creepy monsters. This is the second person we find in the city, the second survivor, who ended up taking his own life. An interesting pattern in this game is how often these side characters will end up taking their own lives, as we will see further ahead in the game. After dealing with the tunnels, we find the doctor again, but this time, strangely, he's severing someone's head off. Upon seeing us, he runs away and leaves us to fight another big monster. This is the second boss of the game, and the only way we can defeat it is if we shock it through the watershed floor with these valves around the room. After doing that, we do some exploring to find something sharp enough so that we can open the boss's belly and take back the key it had just eaten in front of us. With the key, we can go back to exploring the Nightmare City. Back into the streets, it doesn't take long for us to find another strange enemy. This large creature with many faces and many limbs. We cannot kill it with our weapons, so we, instead, need to avoid it. At this point in the game, we also start seeing these enemies with growths in them. These tentacles covering their bodies. Why did such a strange thing happen to these people? Maybe this supposed virus isn't airborne after all. Who knows? After a little, while we walk through some back alleys, we start suddenly being hunted down by the chainsaw monster I previously mentioned. The Sour was nothing in comparison to this second chainsaw monster. He runs after us and he is unkillable, which leaves us with no other option rather than to just run away from him. After we manage to escape the guy, we end up in a large park, a place where we do a funny puzzle, then we get a sniper, and then we make our way into a smaller park in front of another apartment building. While here, we receive a mysterious call. Someone wants us to get up on the roofs, so we naturally do that without questioning. Up there, Simon discovers that the person who called him was Sophie. A colleague, maybe from high school or from college, Simon is quite acquainted with. But the strange thing is, she seems to be completely unaware of the monsters and creatures that are roaming the city. She just called us here to spend some time with her. It becomes obvious with time that Simon loves this girl, but it so would seem she doesn't have the same feelings for him. After a long cutscene of them talking about their inner pain and how to get out of this problematic mess called life, Sophie jumps off the edge of the roof to her death. Simon doesn't follow her, but shortly thereafter, the third boss of the game shows itself. Carcass is this monster's name. This creature was the one responsible for making Sophie jump off, and now Simon has to fight it and kill it. After Carcass is done for, Simon goes down to see Sophie's body, and he discovers that she was carrying a keycard he needed to make his way back home. Now, Simon had just lost his loved one in this city filled with monsters. His only option is to keep on pressing forward. After we're done with the Carcass and with Sophie, Simon decides to focus on his mission to use the subway so that he can get home. At the entrance of the subway station, we start having this enemy with a handgun and a bag for its head. This enemy can shoot at the player, but upon getting close enough to Simon, the creature will simply shoot its own head and die. So it is a viable strategy for you to just run up to these guys and make them off themselves. Simon discovers that if he wants to get into the subway, he will need a fuse, so he takes a detour deeper into the city through some alleys. In these alleys, the player is chased once more by the Saw Runner, how the second chainsaw monster is called, and the only thing to remain between the monster and Simon is a rusted gate. Later, when the player has to make his way back to the subway, we find that the Saw Runner is missing. All we hear is a scream and the noise of his blooded saw. There is Harbor College, a place Simon probably studied at, and also a place we can find the fuse we need to get into the subway. So Simon makes his way there. The atmosphere of this section of the game, both upon arriving and upon leaving this part of the city, is just, once more, perfect. The player gets the view of a river that cuts through the city. We can see the lights on the other side. There's also the street in front of the college, an empty place without any monsters. Upon leaving this area, it starts raining, which makes the atmosphere just much better. We see the streets getting wet. We see the rain falling over the river as we make our way back. This could have been a normal night like any other, were it not for the monsters we must face to survive. These atmospheric parts are my favorite thing out of Cry of Fear, since, well, as I also expressed on my video about Afraid of Monsters, I have walked around a lot during the night. I've seen places just like these ones. I've felt the same as Simon probably feels when he walks in these places alone, as you might also feel. You may also know this feeling I'm talking about. And above the killing of the monsters aspect of the game, above the loneliness and sorrow we will see ahead, this feeling of being alone in a city while it is nighttime or while it is raining is the one thing in this game that I love the most. But well, with enough said, I'll just share with you the curious fact that Harbor College was inspired and modeled after the Cyber Gymnasiet in Stockholm, a place where the developer of this game, Andreas Ronberg, studied and graduated at. So that's really cool. And let's move on. We get into the college, we steal the fuse, the lights go out and we have to fight some monsters. We do that, we go back to the subway, and now we can go underground. For Simon to be able to leave the city in his train, he needs to get to different areas of the subway. And for starters, for him to get to those areas, he must first crush one of those bizarre flash flowers that is blocking one of the tunnels. So after some video game shenanigans, we do exactly that. Crush the beast and now we can progress forward. For people with claustrophobia, this part of the game must be a nightmare, because the player has to go through tight dark tunnels and air vents to be able to get where Simon needs to. Personally, I find this part of the game the least interesting, mostly because of the necessity for the player to use flares and because of these stupid dark tunnels. But the one thing I like about this part is the running trains we need to escape from. Otherwise, well, Simon will be ran over by them, getting completely crushed, so be careful when exploring these dark passages. After we're done with this part and back into the subway, Simon witnesses the doctor shooting another person and then running away. He tries to run after the doctor, but he quickly discovers that for him to be able to go deeper into the subway levels, he needs 2 fuses. In this part, the player needs to go back into the city to get the fuses. One of them is pretty easy. All we have to do is just go back to the first subway entrance Simon went in and get the fuse from there. The matter is done. Now for the second fuse, the player has to explore both new areas of the city, but also areas already explored before. In this part of the game we find a new enemy, the Giant. And they are just such a creepy enemy. I had to record a lot of scenes with them just because of how scary they are. And also, they can kill you with a single attack and they have a lot of health. So they're not to be underestimated. But well, moving on. We make our way back into the apartment building from the very beginning of the game. The place is even more destroyed and flooded now than it was before. In this place we get the second fuse and then we make our way back to the subway. With the 2 fuses, Simon is able to venture into the deeper and darker levels of the subway. We explore until finding a train suitable for getting Simon home. But for he to be able to leave with that train, he needs to get the 2 fuses and open the subway gates. So we naturally go back, break a yellow brick wall, get the fuses and then we open the gates. Simon then gets into the train and, as if by magic, the train leaves the subway by itself. Simon is on his way home now. After Simon reminisces about everything he has gone through, he realizes that something must be wrong. Why did Sophie not understand the dangers of the monsters? Who was that doctor guy? Why was the city filled with monsters? But before he can think further about what is happening, he hears a crash from a different wagon of the train. Even in the train, Simon wasn't in a safe place, so he has to make his way back the wagons to kill all the enemies that are within them. I like how in this part you can first see the tunnel outside, and then, as you make your way from one wagon to the next, you can see the city being left behind, until the forest takes over the size of the train tracks. just a neat little detail. Simon eventually finds a random foot. He takes this foot back to the first wagon, where there was an open briefcase, a place where the foot belonged to. Upon putting the foot there though, the train derails. The bridge ahead had crumbled, and there, only a fall to death could be found. So just like in Uncharted, the player has to make his way up the wagon to escape it before the train falls into the darkness. Simon hasn't gotten home yet. He now will need to make his way through the dark forest, and one thing that only makes everything worse is how he lost his bag when the train derailed. Simon has no other choice but to wander blindly into the forest, without anything in his hands. And before we continue into the next events of the game, I would like to take a time off to talk about what is truly happening in Cry of Fear. I love the main menu for this game. We have this ominous, depressing music in the background, this view of a river that cuts through the city, with a bridge with train tracks above it. From time to time, we see a train crossing over the bridge. It is nighttime, the sky is dark, but there is falling snow from the sky. Imagine how cold this place must be this time of the year. The main menu tells you how cold, dark and depressing this game truly is. And it being the first thing that you see out of this game, it is definitely a memorable first impression. At one point in the game, right after we leave the starting apartment area, we need to call a number to make more progress. The matter is that this number is from a depression hotline we find off a newspaper on the ground. We call it, and instead of getting help, we get some creepy voice telling us the numbers to a keypad that's on our way forward. This is just a subtle hint on what's truly happening here. The truth is, our main character, Simon, has suffered with depression for a long time before what we can call the Black Day. The Black Day is basically what we saw at the end of the intro cutscene. Simon getting hit by a car. That was something that actually happened. A car crashed into him and, because of his wounds, Simon would completely lose the movement of his lower body, which got him stuck to a wheelchair. Throughout the entire game, we see cutscenes or hear the doctor talking about Simon's condition. He was already a depressed and disturbed individual before the accident, and after it, he only got worse. At one point in the game, we get a cutscene on something that happened before the Black Day, when Simon tried to confess his love to Sophie. But unfortunately, she didn't feel the same way as he did, which ended up in Sophie rejecting Simon. This was one of the things that aggravated his depression before losing the movement of his legs. Simon was the one who came up with the name of the Black Day, one which he would refuse to talk about with the doctor, just as he also refused to talk about anything before the accident. The doctor we see in the game is the same doctor we see helping Simon. His name is Purnell. Dr. Purnell had trouble making any progress in turning Simon's life better. So, one day, he told Simon to start writing a book about how he was feeling, something Purnell called as cognitive therapy. During the game, we sometimes find a strange enemy, a man with a book for his head. This is Simon's representation of Purnell's suggestion for him to write a book. One thing that happens in the very beginning of the game that I haven't told you is the nightmare section with the camera. After Simon gets run over by the car, he doesn't immediately wake up in an alley. Instead, we have this part in which we need to use our camera to take photographs of these X's drawn with chalk. By doing that, we reveal what's really in the darkness, whether it be a path ahead, nothing at all, or in the worst case, dead bodies. As we go down a long hallway with an X far away, we get jump scared by a large monster face. This is what wakes Simon up in that alley, and so his journey begins. In many occasions in this game, we go through nightmare sequences. They are all obviously just inside Simon's head. For all it takes is for Simon to close and open the door again, and what seemed to be a nightmarish place would go back to normal, as if nothing had happened. The longest and hardest nightmare sequence of the game is the one we get when the player breaks down the brick wall to get the 2 fuses to leave the city by train. In this nightmare sequence, we see many hanging cages with people cutting themselves while trapped inside. The player's path only becomes more distorted the deeper we go inside the nightmare. After doing some parkour, we then get into a puzzle room. We need to basically figure out the order of Simon's story so that we may be able to go through the right doors. And once that's done, the player can fall into the final part of this nightmare sequence. The final part is basically a hellish maze. There is these hanging bodies with a tentacle where their heads should be. If you touch them, it's an insta-kill. You're dead. So the player has to make his way through the maze to escape. At least, the game is generous enough to give you a map you can locate yourself with, so that's a good thing. Another nightmare sequence, and arguably the most important one from the entire game, is the one we have when Simon goes back to the apartment building to get the fuse. Previously in this video I didn't get into the details of this part of the game because I wanted to save the nightmare content to this specific chapter. But without further ado, let's talk about the apartment nightmare. Basically, we discovered that real-life Simon lived here in these apartments, and because he was stuck to a wheelchair, his home was right in front of the apartment's elevator. This apartment right here we see locked off from the rest of the building. Upon getting inside, we go down a ladder to discover a dark corridor without any discernible end. And while walking it down, we hear the doctor talking about Simon's case. In this part of the game, you can already connect all the pieces and realize what's truly happening in Cry of Fear, which is basically everything I told you so far in this chapter of the video. But well, let's move on. After hearing the doctor's dialogue, we fight monsters in a room with a large head at the center. You may remember this head as the same one from the camera nightmare. After that, we fall down into a pitch black place. We escape off until we go back to the waking world and get a fuse. That's all for this nightmare. None of it was real. There's only a bloody room from where we came from. There are a few other nightmare sequences in the game, but these ones I talked about in this chapter are the most important ones you should know about. The first thing we find in the forest is a tree branch we can use for defense and a lamp to illuminate the darkness. The forest is a better iteration of the dark woods from Afraid of Monsters. And as much as I enjoyed that part of Afraid of Monsters, I must admit that the version made for Cry of Fear is much better. It feels more like a real forest. It is way more open, it is darker and more confusing for you to explore, as a forest is in real life. There's a special feeling about being lost in a forest. This is a place which, during the day, becomes a safe haven, a place of peace and serenity, a truly free place for the spirit of man. But at night, if you don't have a tent risen, a safe camp for you to buckle inside, these forests can become quite a dangerous place. This forest is my favorite part of the game, but from Simon's perspective, these woods are just another dangerous place he's trapped at, and he has to get home. From a clearing, the Sawrunner goes after Simon once more, but we manage to evade him and hide inside some abandoned houses. After that, there's a wooded area. From its trees, hanging bodies fall down to the ground level and hurt Simon. Maybe these are the spirits of those who committed suicide in this forest. Sweden's edition of Aokigahara from Japan. After escaping the deepest parts of the dark forest, Simon ends up down a path that leads to an abandoned asylum, and from there, he sees the doctor entering the place through its front gates. This is certainly where Simon will finally face the Doctor and confront him. This asylum reminds me of the book Veronica Decides to Die, which has an asylum of its own. And at the same time, it also reminds me of the album of the same name by the band Saturnus. That album has some depressing themes that go quite well with Cry of Fear, and also, if it isn't obvious enough, the album is inspired by that book. I highly recommend you listen to that album and read that book, by the way. They're both depressing, and I love them. With enough said, let's go back to Simon's journey. After we enter the asylum and turn the lights on, we find the Doctor on the other side of a gate on the first floor. He tells Simon that he wants him to give him a handgun we can find in the bowling alley of the asylum. In this part of the game, the player can choose whether to give him the gun or not. In my case, I decided to trust him and give him the gun. The Doctor gives Simon a key, and then he proceeds to, out of nowhere, shoot Simon. This permanently caps the player's life on a lower amounted total. Now we're not only stuck with a smaller inventory because of the loss of our bag, but also less health, which increases the difficulty of this final part of the game. Wounded and battered, we make our way into the attic of the asylum. And there, Simon gets into a duel with the Doctor. They shoot at each other until one of the men goes to the floor, which in this case, of course the Doctor goes to the ground. As the Doctor lays on the ground, Simon shows him no mercy as he crushes the Doctor's face under the mask. That's the end for that enigmatic figure. The Doctor, who has been running around town, trying to escape Simon ever since they met each other back in the basements of that apartment building, all the way back at the beginning of the game. With the Doctor been dealt with, Simon is free to go out the back of the asylum and head toward home. At this moment, we can see how it is morning outside. The birds are singing and everything feels somewhat safe, in comparison to everything we've been through until this point of the game. There's a special feeling about this section. You know that feeling I'm talking about. It is early in the morning, the sun is rising, you're tired but still awake. You can hear the birds singing outside. Maybe you didn't sleep too well, or you had to wake up earlier today. Maybe you're coming back home from a vacation. That special feeling while everyone else is sleeping. The morning fog is dissipating, but you're still here. You need to push forward a little bit more and not give up. That's all you need to do. Simon needs to make his way through the last portion of the forest until he can get back home. So in this part, we, the player, cross a lake by rowing a boat. What a calming place this seems. There is the forest all around us, and everything seems to be back to normal. There is no monsters in sight. Only the lake, only the forest on the horizon, and only the blue morning sky above us. That is, until the player has to enter an abandoned house and fall inside a basement filled with enemies. So yeah, we need to make one last push through these dangerous basements. Then we go through some sewers. This part is also the last time we see the Saw Runner. He never comes back again and we don't kill him. I think that's a missed opportunity to have him as one of the last bosses of the game. If you ask me, a fight against him at the end of the game would have been amazing. But regardless, after the sewers, the player finds himself in this more rural neighborhood. This place has simple houses with lawns, drive-ins, and it is filled and surrounded by trees. It seems like a really calm and nice place for someone to live. But unfortunately, even in such a beautiful place as this is, there is still monsters for Simon to face and kill. Simon makes his way through the neighborhood, killing many monsters and getting many guns and ammunition, until eventually, he gets his mother's house on his sights. Curiously, in that street his mother's house is located at, there are no monsters, as if, somehow, that place were truly a safe place. He enters the house, he calls for his mom, but nobody answers. He looks around and there is nobody, until he gets to his bedroom. A very familiar bedroom, and a place where he finds a mysterious book, which seems to have been opened and left there in purpose for him to find. Before we get into the last chapter of this video and talk about the endings the player can get in this game, I would just like to briefly talk about the soundtrack for this game. So the developer, Andreas Ronberg, is not only a game developer but also a musician. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that he was behind a band called Intig. Such a great band with some great material. And the soundtrack for this game was also made by him. I like the soundtrack a lot. There are darker moments, tenser moments, some depressing ones, but there's also clarity, peace and calmness in the soundtrack. Such a great soundtrack for a great game. After getting home and interacting with the book, this is the part of the game that will change based off the ending you're going to get. In the first 3 endings, Simon gets transported into the last nightmare sequence of the game. There are twisting, blooded corridors everywhere. The place seems like an endless maze with many pits that can lead into your death. Towards the end of the nightmare, there's a tornado of notebook pages and Simon has to climb all the way up into a chamber of death. Inside that chamber of death, Simon fights what I'm going to call here as Author Simon, the one stuck to the wheelchair, the one controlling the fate of Book Simon, the character we've been playing as during the entire game. After unlocking the gate for Book Simon to get to Author Simon, we have the final confrontation between the two of them, and so would seem that Book Simon has won and has killed the author. After this bittersweet victory is when we get one of the first 3 endings. There are 2 main events in this game that decide which ending you will get after Simon gets home. First, whether or not you fight the Carcass boss. Yes, you can run away instead of fighting that creature. Well, if you're a coward, that is. And second, whether or not you trusted the doctor and gave him a gun or not. Before we get into the endings, I just want to explain to you what these decisions mean to Simon. First, by killing the Carcass boss, Simon forgives Sophie for his unrequited love. It shows how he has grown past that pain. How he faced the fact that, sometimes in life, you may think that someone is the right person for you, when that person actually isn't. By escaping and not fighting Carcass, this symbolizes how Simon, instead of fighting his inner demons, he kept all of that pain and anger within himself, not ever resolving it, not ever accepting Sophie's rejection. Second, when it comes to whether trusting or not the doctor, this symbolizes whether Simon's cognitive therapy treatment works or not, for better or for worse. By trusting the doctor, it shows how he accepts the fact that Purnell is doing his best to help Simon, as difficult as it is to deal with him. If the player chooses not to trust the doctor, then Simon doesn't accept Purnell's treatment, and it only ends up worsening the situation, making Simon angrier within himself and angrier toward the doctor. With that said, let's get to the first ending, which is the worst possible one. In this ending, Simon escapes the Carcass and decides not to trust the doctor. In every ending we get to hear a narration of Simon's last words in his book. The same book he decided to write to take part in Purnell's cognitive therapy procedure. In the first ending, it is the one which Simon, instead of sounding depressed and sad, sounds completely aggressive, mad and out of himself. By not killing the Carcass nor trusting the doctor, Simon ended up killing Sophie. In the end, she didn't love him back, so why should he show her any mercy? Simon also kills the doctor. Purnell was just using him as a lab rat anyway, trying his new methods without even knowing if they will work out or not. In the end, it all just served to make Simon even angrier at everything. After writing his last notes filled with rage and anger, Simon decided to take his own life. The second ending is less worse than the first, but still it isn't a good ending. In this one, Simon kills the Carcass but decides not to trust the doctor. Simon writes his last notes on his book, noting how he forgave Sophie. She didn't love him, and that was alright. He forgave her for that. He was a mess anyway and couldn't take care of her. But the doctor was another matter completely. Simon killed him for using him as a lab rat, and then Simon ended his own life. The third ending is just like the second one. In this one, Simon escapes the Carcass but decides to trust the doctor. Simon writes in his notebook how the doctor did the best he could to help him. They tried the new cognitive therapy, but it ultimately didn't work. Simon forgave the doctor for failing, but someone he didn't forgive was Sophie. He loved her and she didn't love him back, and so he decided to take her out before ending himself. The fourth ending is the best possible one. Although it isn't necessarily a good ending nor a perfect ending, things are still bad, but in comparison to the other choices, well... In this one, Simon kills the Carcass and decides to trust the doctor. In this ending, after getting home and interacting with the book, instead of going to the same nightmare sequence as the one from the previous 3 endings, this time we play as author Simon, stuck to the wheelchair. Simon was going to end himself, but mysteriously, the door to his apartment opens right behind him. Simon then makes a decision to face the true monster, the last threat between him and accepting his new life. Book Simon was that threat. We as the player need to wheel around to go after the evil Simon. The few chances we have, we take shots at him, until we arrive at one last hallway. Evil Simon runs after us with a flare and an axe, but the real Simon manages to kill the monster and end the nightmare for good. In the real world though, Simon, instead of killing himself, killed 2 policemen who came into his apartment. They probably received a tip from someone who knew Simon intended to end his own life, but upon arriving there to stop him, they instead found their own end. Simon now has decided to go on with his life. Although he will have to face the consequences of his actions, he will, at least, have his life to choose a better tomorrow. Purnell did his best with the cognitive therapy procedure, and it somewhat worked. Simon wrote down everything he felt in a twisted apocalyptic story, but it at least helped him regain his senses and his focus on his new life. Sophie also was more present in his life, although not as a lover, but as a close friend who helped him whenever necessary. Simon eventually learned to forgive her for his unrequited love, but as time went on, she drifted away and, apparently, met someone else to spend time with. Even if things feel dire and it seems that there is no tomorrow, no matter how bad things are, there's still hope and there's still a tomorrow waiting for you to rise up and make your own story. Pain is not something to be avoided, but instead, it is something that serves to make us stronger. Take that pain with all you have and become stronger. Never give up. As Simon hasn't, as I haven't.